Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nonviolence International's YouTube channel. This is our Spotlight series, where we talk with activists, scholars, and advocates leading the way in global action. My name is Rachel, and joining me today is co-host and fellow intern at Nonviolence International, Ahad. How are you, Ahad?
Hey, I'm good. Thank you so much again, Rachel.
Yeah, no problem. I'm excited that we get to take time to reflect on all of our spotlights that we've done over the course of the semester, the amazing people we talked to, and just kind of like what it was like to talk to these activists. So during this interview, we're going to do three kind of important aspects of our season of spotlights: the influence of civil resistance on our interviewees, the creative process behind designing our interviews and selecting our different candidates, and what we as young nonviolent activists take away from spotlights. Sound good?
Yep.
Okay. So first question. Obviously, during our discussion, we're definitely going to be talking about civil resistance. So maybe you can start by just explaining your introduction to nonviolent activism and remind our viewers why you joined NVI in the first place.
So for me, I don't know if I have one unique introduction to civil resistance. A big thing for me was growing up as basically a Desi person living in Alabama. Two people I heard a lot about were Gandhi and MLK Jr. So for me, I think a big motivating factor in my interest in civil resistance and nonviolent resistance is being surrounded by references and constant reminders of these two huge leaders who, for a lot of people, almost symbolize the very ideas that motivate civil resistance and are practically synonymous with the idea of civil resistance. And I mean, with that specifically in mind, the reason I think why I joined NVI specifically was like a lot of college students, I was looking for internships during the summer, but also like a lot of college students, I felt very strongly about wanting to make a difference with what I was doing. And NVI seemed like a great way to work closely with people who felt very strongly motivated by their mission and by the importance of propagating and educating the ideas of civil resistance throughout the world, which is why I wanted to work with NVI specifically, most because of the passion that I saw from the people who were working there when I first talked with them and learned about NVI.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up such a good point, like growing up in that area, like you're exposed to it constantly. But, speaking for myself, I was introduced to nonviolence my sophomore year of college. So that's like 20 years of not knowing really what nonviolent activism was. And I was amazed that something so obvious could be so effective. Um, and I think that the doubts about nonviolence and its effectiveness are really what hold it back from being like so just infinitely successful. So amazing that you got to grow up with that, but I wasn't, introduced to it until about 5 years ago. Um, and having learned that kind of through my undergrad and like starting to dive deeper into it as a graduate student, I joined on NVI also because I did want to get that hands-on experience and begin applying kind of what I learned through my education and trainings, and then actually begin to use it to shape the world. So, yeah, NVI did seem like the perfect place to really like put this into action, like make my words a reality. Um, so thank you for sharing, Ahad. Moving on to our next question. What influenced your decision to interview your selected activists? So why John Deere, why David Corton, and why Christian Omari?
For me, I don't think, at least thinking in like macro terms, I don't think there's an overarching theme that connected I mean, obviously besides civil resistance, nonviolent action, but says I don't think there was a overarching theme that connected the people I talked to, but it was mostly influenced, I think, by the types of people I generally wanted to talk to. So, for example, you mentioned like why John Deere, why David Corden, so for John Deere, I remember very specifically, I was really interested in the idea of Christian nonviolence and like the influences that Christianity and like specifically like religiosity can have on um, your ideas behind resistance and behind whether you should engage in nonviolent action. Like, for example, John Deere, I think, talks very strongly about why you should engage in nonviolent resistance from a Christian lens, behind the ideas of the phrase that supports like beating swords into plowshares, the ways that Jesus acted during his lifetime, and what motivated his actions, which I thought was very interesting for me, which is why I wanted to talk to John Deere. For David, I remember I was very interested just in the ideas that he had, especially as an academic, or previously as an academic. He, I wanted to learn about the ideas that he had from an academic viewpoint. So I think it'd be very interesting hearing about somebody who's like learned about it in such a sense that they like study it to a degree, or
Mhm.
study ideas behind nonviolence, or like how people, him specifically, how people should work better together in our current system of economics divides people. Christian was interesting to me, especially because he's very close to, or he's a lot closer to my age than both David and John.
Mm.
And I found that very interesting because I really wanted to talk to somebody who was known to a degree for their nonviolent activity and their civil resistance on a greater scale, even though they're much younger than some of the other people I'd interviewed, which is especially why I wanted to talk to Christian. What about you, Rachel? Why did you want to talk to the people that you talked to?
Um, I think we kind of took very similar paths. Like we didn't really want to reach for like the earth shakers, the movement makers, but really like who are the people kind of behind the scenes. And I think, um, my first interview with David Solnit was so much fun because he's an art activist. And so it was all about art and music and theater and dance, and how not only that connects people, but it brings more people in. It gives a chance for like the voiceless to be seen and heard in a different kind of way. Maybe you don't want to work on the front lines of a protest, but you want to create this incredible mural honoring your culture and standing up for what you believe in. So I loved my interview with David, and then interviewed Bruce Pearson, who works at ICNC, and we talked a lot about what it was like to be a trainer on the global international level and meet with people who are kind of like at the end of the straw, like they have nothing left, so they're turning to nonviolence. And Bruce was so eloquent, and just the way he held on to the humanness of nonviolent resistance, and the way he honored that, in the way he taught people these tactics. So I loved my interview with Bruce. My interview with Jody Evans from Code Pink was super fun and lighthearted, and got to learn more about like her transition from a very political world, working on Jerry Brown's presidential campaign, and then moving toward more of a leader of a nonprofit that um, helps build other movements. So that was a really interesting perspective. And of course, ending with my very own professor, Dr. Steven Zunez, and also an academic and someone who grew up doing protests and grew up in a family where, it was like war just wasn't a solution. It wasn't even a thought. Both of his parents were pacifists. So, and to see that transition into a world of academia and what that means to teach students nonviolence. And yeah, I'm a little biased. I really liked that interview too. But my decision to interview them was based on, who interests me and what are they doing behind the scenes. But anyway, as a student at Brown, I'm curious how you're going to take what you learned from spotlights and continue to apply this to your education and beyond. So this can be like developing spotlights, developing interviews, or just like what you took from these interviews and how you're going to like just kind of expand on it.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, obviously, at a very basic level, I definitely believe that I learned a lot about how to interview and how to
Totally.
talk to people in like interview setting. But talking more specifically about what I learned from my spotlights and the candidates I talked to, I feel that each of them left me with a lot of things to think about,
Mm.
which I think is always really important to deal with. So, for example, talking again about John Deere and his Christian nonviolent resistance. I'm not Christian. I'm Muslim. I've always been raised as Muslim, but growing up in Alabama also was surrounded by a lot of Christianity
Mm.
and Christian people. And I think it's always interesting to learn about how people who are different than you and who are raised in different environments, technically, and even from like a religious, just from a religious stance, can still come obviously to the same conclusions that you do. And that's something that you can unite over, which I think is always great that so many people from so many different walks of life, raised so many different ways with so many different understandings of the world, still all come to the same one conclusion that nonviolent civil resistance is the path forward. And that should always be the way that we approach creating change. Connecting to that also was David Corden and his role in economics.
Mm.
I've studied economics a lot at Brown, and one thing I found, obviously, with the neoclassical model that you're taught in these econ classes, is that there's the one grounding assumption under almost all of economics, like as a mathematical kind of discipline, is the idea that each individual human is selfish to the degree that they're purely self-serving and aren't altruistic in any way, which obviously isn't true, and isn't true to the degree that it's a joke that there's Homo sapiens, but then they also call it Homo economicus, the rational man, the person who consumes as much as they can based on the idea of maximizing their utility, which what I learned from David Corden was a lot of pushing back on that idea, the idea that people want to help other people. People obviously care about other people. You don't see a parent charging their child for like the service of raising them. You raise them because they're your child. So I think I learned a lot from that about the fact that people should, going forward, create a system that helps to serve the idea that we're altruistic and we want to help each other, and
Mm.
not the like further divide us and focus on the idea that we should be quote unquote rational, as you'd see from an economics viewpoint. Um, and then one thing I learned from Christian was that was really important was you're never too young to be a part of nonviolent civil resistance. Even if other people might even say that you're too young, you're never too young. You can always make a difference as long as you try to make a difference. You always just do the best that you can. And one thing I really loved talking to him about also was his discussions basically about he talked a lot about gerrymandering and the role that it does and how you can resist it, which he did by testifying in a case I remember, as well as giving speeches about the role that gerrymandering serves in further dividing communities of color and dividing people who need access to these voting institutions but are denied them by people who currently have power because they don't want them to be able to vote. And as since the division is voting based, you're not going to be able to necessarily vote the systems out, which is why we have to look towards nonviolent civil resistance as a way of making it clear, making our voices heard, and taking action against the systems that are holding people down by not allowing for voting in a fair and equitable way. Um, but moving on, like, what do you think, Rachel? Like, what do you think your main takeaways are, and how you're gonna use them going forward, learning about nonviolent resistance from all of the interviews you did?
Yeah, I mean, Ahad, you did such a beautiful job saying that, you know, people are not as selfish as we think they are. And really, that is the root of nonviolent activism because you can't do it alone. It's all about people power. And that was one of the biggest takeaways from all of my interviews was each person that I talked to was connected to somebody else. They can't do it without somebody else, and that person can't do without them. And that's really what creates change, is being together and working together. So I think you said that beautifully, Ahad. Well done. Before we kind of wrap this up, I do just want to know, like, what are some highlights from your season on NVI Spotlight Series? Is it the fame? Is it just getting your name out there? What is it?
Definitely biggest thing for me was meeting these like really cool people, which I think that I using NVI's name in the Spotlight series helped me to meet because I feel like otherwise it would have been harder for me to talk to some of these people or more difficult to reach them. So I think it was really cool that in this setting I got to meet these types of people and learn what they had to say and just talk to them. Like it was really cool meeting so many just cool people I never thought I would meet before. Yeah. I mean, what about you, Rachel?
I mean, totally amazing to, you know, use this platform as a way to get NVI's name out there and get, more awareness for nonviolent resistance. And yeah, being able to talk to people with so much wisdom and so much experience and knowing that they all kind of share the same sentiment, which is like, you can do this too. Like there's no reason you can't do this. So yeah, I just thought it was such a interesting opportunity for me as a student of nonviolence to witness the success of other people and them telling me that it's right at your fingertips. You can do anything you want to do. But Ahad, do you have any remaining thoughts or advice you would want to give to those who are trying to get involved in nonviolent resistance or maybe join NVI next year?
Um, you know, whenever people ask me for advice, I always feel like I'm too either inexperienced or young. But I guess, like I said before with
Yeah.
Christian, you should never feel like you're too young to be able to make a difference. So I'd say the biggest thing is what I learned from most people I talked to was the biggest thing was just choose something, find out how you can help, and do it. It's it may not be the best way that you want to help, but find out what you can do and just go ahead and throw yourself headfirst into it. Because the only way you're going to figure out if you can do something or if you like doing something or if you want to do something to help is by doing it. You're never going to find out just by like taking all this time to, like maybe try to like explore without actually exploring, which I think is a thing that can happen, like getting stuck with choice paralysis, not knowing what to do
Totally.
going forward. So I think that was also definitely me with NVI. I think biggest thing is just go ahead, apply to NVI, or find something that you want to do and then go out and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I would let anyone know, it's to join this team of people who are so willing to help you and encourage you to try new things and to be a part of something great and something amazing and something that's going to make waves of change in the world. So yeah, thank you to everyone for taking the time to watch my reflection with Ahad. If you want to learn more about our year here at Nonviolence International, please check out the link in the description. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this important reflection with me, Ahad. I look forward to sharing this with everyone.
Yep. Thank you so much again for setting this up. Really appreciate it.